What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode here on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed and YouTube channel. We have a very fun show lined up today where we're going to be recapping and previewing the March Madness tournament, where we have done all tournament long. It's been a lot of fun getting to this point. We're up to the Final Four now. Very exciting times. You might notice that I'm by myself today. That's okay. No Ceilings has a lot going on kind of behind the scenes right now. I'm going to spoil a little bit because there's really nobody here to stop me. So let's just go ahead and do this. We have our big boards coming up very soon. Now, you've probably heard this. We all just submitted our big boards to the powers that be, if you will, for No Ceilings. And that's been kind of a grind. We've been talking about who we should put in, who we shouldn't, kind of lobbying for different people at where we are at this cycle. It's kind of a weird point to where we know that people are entering the transfer portal, still testing the waters, stuff like that. So we've had that going on. We have people getting ready for Hoop Summit, which is coming up. We have other people, such as myself, who is getting ready to go to Portsmouth for the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament, which is just over a week away. There's a lot going on, so we're kind of spread real thin. But as the college basketball machine continues to grind on, so do we. Bills need to get paid. We're here to do the show. Now, we do have some games that are coming on later today, but what we've been doing up until this point is discussing how we got to be to where we are now. And this basketball tournament has been phenomenal to watch. There's been a lot of people talking about, oh, it's chalk, it's not much fun. You know, how can we enjoy no Cinderellas and stuff like that? Metcalf and I have been of the opinion, and other people I'm sure as well, that basketball has been so much fun to watch because we've gotten these high-end matchups. We've gotten to watch our favorite prospects for the most part, with the exception of a couple here or there, perform under some very bright lights. There haven't really been very many flops, and it's just been such a fun time to be a college basketball and NBA draft fan. We're going to continue to break down the games, individual performances, and because we are No Ceilings, we're going to continue to break down draft prospects because that's just what we do. So let's recap. Let's talk about how we got to be to where we are now. And because the powers that be at CBS and these media outlets were nice enough to let us break down Saturday and Sunday, we'll talk Saturday first. We'll go into Sunday, and then we'll preview this weekend's line of games. And I want to start with Texas Tech versus Florida. Now, Florida wins this game 84-79. And a lot of people, such as myself, expected Florida to win. I didn't think the game was as particularly close as the final score led itself to be. Texas Tech shot 15 more shots than Florida. They had 3 more offensive rebounds. They turned the ball over 5 fewer times than Florida. They scored 17 more points off of turnovers. They were only 0.8% worse from the field, were only 0.7% worse from deep, and made 1 more 3 on 3 fewer attempts. So hearing that, you would think, wow, Texas Tech really stood a good chance to upset this Florida wagon. And they did. And now you're probably wondering, well, how did Florida ultimately end up winning this game? And you probably guessed right. Free throws. Florida shot 27 free throws to Texas Tech's 13. Not only did they get to the line, but they converted. They shot over 92% from the line. Tech only shot like 53% from deep or from the free throw line. That's tough. And now if you lose by 5, you miss 6 free throws, you're going to get an old man take from me. You got to make your free throws, especially in the tournament. And we'll talk about some specific players who weren't really performing up to their usual standards, specifically from the free throw line. But when you're down by as much as 10 with 6 minutes left in the game in your Florida, who do you lean on to come back and beat a Texas Tech team that was looking kind of primed to beat you in some portions of the game? They won on the back of Walter Clayton Jr. and his poise, his just complete comfort from scoring anywhere on the floor. Just phenomenal performance from him. Not only did Walter Clayton Jr. show up, but Hawk has been phenomenal for Florida quietly throughout the season, but his three-point shooting in this game on Saturday and his timely defensive plays really allowed Florida to come away victorious in this game. I want to talk about Walter Clayton Jr. in specific. He's been doing a lot recently to really improve his draft stock. If you're talking about a guy who has been in this like early to mid second round range throughout most of the season, he's storming up boards as of late. Some of that has to do with most of this class is really leaving the door open for other people to kind of rise up and make themselves known amongst the draft community. And you're probably, if you're an NBA fan, you're seeing a little bit of this for the awards races, where if you're the loudest at the latter portions of the cycle, you're going to see your stock exponentially rise. And that's what we've been seeing from Walter Clayton Jr. He had 30 points, 4 assists, 2 boards, and 2 blocks. He made as many free throws as Texas Tech in this game, which that's the secret sauce, right? Especially we talk about how guards are so important when you get to the postseason in college basketball, especially these experienced guards. Walter Clayton he was instrumental. He was effective with and without the ball. There were so many plays where he was hitting a step back 3-1 play. The next play, the offense was flowing through the big men of Florida, and Walter Clayton Jr. would make a timely cut and score. I just think that with everywhere that Walter Clayton Jr. was on offense, he was a threat. And that's because of the way that Coach Golden at Florida runs their offense. And it's very pro-friendly, which makes the NBA projection for Walter Clayton Jr. that much more easy, in my opinion. He's got the three-point shot, which we saw. He's got the playmaking to be an ancillary kind of floor spacing off guard. And I think that that's valuable. NBA teams think that that's valuable. We see these guards flourish all the time, especially when you have bigger creators, you have these pressure points in the offensive system. Guys like Walter Clayton Jr. can just make an impact throughout multiple areas of the floor. Not only was his offense good, but I was a fan of some defensive portions that he had throughout this game where he did enough not to be a target. You know, he wasn't blocking shots like most of the Florida big men do, but he had active hands. He didn't get credited with the steal in this game, but there's a highlight if you want to go back and watch how this game ultimately ended up breaking down. Houck had a phenomenal transition dunk, a couple really big plays, and we're going to talk about Houck here more in a little bit, but there was one play in particular where Houck gets the steal, drives down the floor, throws down a thunderous dunk, and it was really, really good. Walter Clayton Jr. forced that play. Like, if you look at the defensive side of the ball, Walter Clayton Jr. forced the ball carrier to pick up his dribble, kind of spin into danger, where Houck really got to eat off of that. Now, again, that's not a play that Walter Clayton Jr. is going to get credited with, but you watch the game, you understand the intricacies and the fundamentals of defense, of presence, footwork, active hands, things like that. Walter Clayton Jr. did a really good job in that regard. He bothered some shots on closeout, actually got credited with a block on a closeout, which was amazing to see. I just think because he's been a real prospect throughout the year, and shout out to everybody who's tuning in live, you know, getting ready for this game. Norrin Rad in the chat says, I think Walter Clayton Jr. can sneak into the first round. I want to talk about that because, as I mentioned earlier, we're submitting our big boards right now for these projects that we get to do, right? I have Walter Clayton Jr. 24th. Now, it's not my final ranking. I still don't feel good about certain ranges to where I'm like confident, willing to stand on 10 toes and really hammer down where I feel for these prospects. But I like him as a back half of the first round. So, Norrin, I agree with you. And anybody else who's watching, please feel free to interact. We've always been a fan-friendly show here. So, you got anything you want to talk about, anything you want to get off your chest, you want to proclaim, pound your chest, say where you're right, you know, say where other people were wrong, we'll do that. Easy day. But speaking of late risers on big board, Thomas Houck put up 20 points, 11 rebounds, 2 assists, a block, and a steal. He did that coming off of the bench. And he played 30 minutes in this game, 2 more minutes than Alex Condon, who has garnered a lot of draft consideration recently. Houck had 4 of 6 from deep. And not only was he 4 of 6 for today's game, he's quietly gone like this 35% from deep throughout the season. He is doing enough to where you can consider him a real 3-4 prospect. We'll talk about where I have him on my board, but I really want to hammer down this game because him being 4 of 6 from deep was the difference maker in this game, especially towards the second half where he stepped up and made some real timely threes. He puts a lot of pressure on the rim. He's a very active and aggressive player, and I think a guy who is becoming loud at the right moment, like I spoke on earlier. He is making a real case for himself to be a draftable prospect. Not only draftable, but potentially another first-round guy. You know, he's doing enough, and what we're seeing right now in the draft cycle, again, I'm going to hammer the draft because that's what we do here. There are a lot of people who are talking about transferring, coming back, testing the waters, or outright declaring, right? We're seeing a lot of that at this point. Florida is still playing in the tournament, so you're still going to see a bunch of these guys, you know, granted from the one Michigan guy who said, hey, I'm going to do this while I'm actually playing in the tournament. There's a lot of players who have a decision that is still left to be made that are playing active basketball. And if you made it to this point, it's because your team is really good at keeping the behind-the-scenes stuff behind the scenes. We don't know what any of these guys want to do yet. Houck could still make a case for himself to be a credible first-round guy. Now, I want to talk about the three-point shot because, yes, he made 4 of 6. Yes, he is a 35% three-point shooter, excuse me. The shot takes a little bit of time to get off, which I think is why people have been kind of so hesitant as to really put him into consideration. But as you continue to be one of these last men standing, so to speak, you kind of get looked at through these rose-colored lenses a little bit. Now, I have him 29th on my latest big board. In games like this, where he had 11 rebounds, which tied a game high with JT Toppin, we'll talk about him more here in a little bit. He did this in 30 minutes where JT Toppin is an integral part. Not only is he integral, he is like the guy on Texas Tech. Houck comes in off the bench, rebounds just as much as him, right? 2 assists. I love his vision. He did a really good job of showing how he can see the floor. And it's not always this, I'm going to stand on the elbow. I'm going to put my back to the defense to where I have this built-in shielding to where people can't go in and make my pass more difficult than it needs to be. He can do some really fun stuff off of the bounce. It's not the strongest part of his game, but I think as a sophomore prospect who's really kind of stepped into a big role on a contending team, there's enough there to where I know and I could see NBA officials saying, we can dig into this. We can do more with this. Now, he, again, moves well laterally, set good screens, and he plays really, really hard. And I think that's what speaks well to his projection is his motor. He did have 4 fouls in this game. So if you want to get super in detailed, you kind of wonder what he would look like if he had to be relied upon more, be a little bit more intelligent with the effort that he gives in consistently on these play-by-play bases. How much could he really sell out? Where Florida now has, 4 front court players that they can routinely rely upon. If any of them get in foul trouble, just next man up mentality. It's going to be interesting to see how his projection works when he's going to be more heavily relied upon. Now, picking him up late first round, maybe he is continuing to going to be this rotational guy to where if he gets in foul trouble in the NBA, it's not going to mean as much because maybe there is more depth whenever you get to this last half of the first round. But it is interesting to see how his performance in this game really allows him to continue to make a name for himself. Elijah Martin, my guy. You guys have heard me talk about him. You're going to continue to hear his name come from me as the draft continues to rise up. He was the only Florida Gator who scored in double figures. He had a sweet tip in play. If you could, again, go back and look at some highlights of this game. If you missed it, it was a phenomenal game. Elijah Martin had his best play, in my opinion, was pressuring the ball handler, tips it over the ball handler, forcing a steal, this transition play, picks up this steal, and throws down a nasty dunk, and he does it really fast. This wasn't his most efficient game, and I'll give people that. I understand why people are hesitant. There's a reason why he's not a mainstream, dead-on first-round talent. I'm not even advocating that you put him first round. I think in the second round, though, you can do a lot worse than a guy who has taken two teams to as far in the tournament as he has, playing an integral part on those teams, being this emotional dog, this leader of men. And the fact that he can continue to carve out great defensive roles, that he can continue to be a consistent enough shooter from deep to be relied upon. He strings plays along. He's probably not going to be your lead guard, but he can be a guard in a rotation to where I think that he can be relied upon. I've always said that he is what if Patrick Beverley could be a little bit more buttoned up? But I still think you get as much of a dog as a Patrick Beverley with an Elijah Martin. Let's go to the chat real quick. Norm Rad said, Hawk is a legit too. I think he'll return, though, just a feeling. And that Elijah Martin is a hooper built like a bull. I agree with both of those things. Now, D. Jota, excuse me if I mispronounced that, says Condon is probable declare and test waters. I think that's about it. Hawk isn't going to get isn't going to get a guaranteed contract. He might get real minutes next year. Clayton would earn absolute bank in college. I think that it's easy to say, yes, if you come back, you're going to get bank. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of guys enter the transfer portal. But we're seeing, in my opinion, I'd have to go back, don't aggregate this. It's just a gut feeling. I think we're seeing less test but maintain college eligibility this season compared to last. And I'll credit Sam Vecini of The Athletic for this take that he put up a few days ago, where he said, with the portal being open where it is and teams needing to fill their rosters, so to speak, a lot of money is being allocated to guys that they know are going to be there, which means that if you're going to test with the thought that you might be able to come back, that kind of minimizes your schools that you're going to be able to go to. Now we've seen Xavier Lee of Princeton. Princeton's not a huge NIL school. He can afford to go and do that. But I think with the names that we've seen so far, you're going to see less testing. And again, because Florida is where they are in the season, you don't really get to see what their intent is right now. And I think that's kind of a good thing. I would hate to see what Condon, Hawk, so on and so forth want to do moving forward after this year at this point of the season. And I think that it's an interesting discussion. Let's switch sides, though. Let's talk about Texas Tech. JT Toppin had some nice numbers at face value. 20 points. We touched on the 11 boards. 1 assist, 1 steal, and 1 block. Now, the reason I said face value is you go just a step below. He was only 9 of 22 from the floor, so 20 points on 22 attempts. Not the best look. He missed all 5 of his free throws. And again, if you want to talk about the score of this game being a 5-point game, your kind of heart and soul, your star player going 0-4 from the free throw line, not a good look. It's not what you want to see. He did go 2-3 from deep, but he did, if you look at the three-pointer that he missed in the second half of the game, where ebbing and flow and Florida's really starting to kind of storm back, the 3 that he missed was not a good one, where he was top of the key. There was so much time left on the shot clock. Yes, he was open. Is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze at that point? Probably not. But we'll talk about why he might have wanted to take that shot at that point compared to how some of the other teammates were doing. He did short arm a few shots. His left float hook shot wasn't really there in the last 6 minutes, where time is really dwindling down. I do think this performance is where where teams or NBA officials are kind of hesitant in his projection because he plays the 5 in college. He did shoot 2 or 3 for today, but he's not really a long-term three-point shooter, in my opinion. I don't think that teams are going to have the patience for him to grow into a consistent shot where he's a returning player for this year. He isn't consistent from college three-point line. Can he be in the pros? That's where the projection gets rough. But if you look at Florida, who does run a very NBA type, maybe light system scheme on both ends of the floor, and if you look at the size of Florida, how they were able to impact his scoring so close to the basket is really where I think the concerns are for his game. And this is not the first time that we've seen a really rough JT Toppin performance. It's just magnified, again, because how loud or quiet are you at this point of the season. But if you want to go back and look at some of these other games where he just really wasn't himself, look at the last time they played Houston, both Arizona games. Even go back way towards the beginning of the season where he played against Syracuse. He's just had some tough games, and I think that's why NBA teams, officials, other people who are in the media who put together their big boards have him in like this early to mid second round range. And it sucks because he's had like some real burner games where he is just kind of this manimal, for shout out to anybody who knows who I'm talking about, but this manimal type performances where he'll get 20 and 15 and he'll get a couple of blocks, or he'll look like he could project to be a 3-point shooter from deep. It's really hard to buy into his size, his skill set, and see performances like this. I have him 35th. I just submitted my big board. I finalized it. I have him 35th. I think that there's something there to where NBA teams could fall in love, so to speak, and find a little bit of a role for him. I think if he does, it's just getting so easy to sell these undersized big men who have athleticism but don't have the length to Golden State. And I think that's really the only team that you can project these guys to. I'll go back to Norton Rad in the chat. Shout out to everybody who's watching. I'm seeing the numbers climb up. Thank you all so much for spending a little bit of your Saturday with me. Brandon Clark-ish, so maybe a Memphis Grizzlies type team. And Dirty Dancer, probably the most traveled draft fan in the sphere, says, I never know how to judge slightly inefficient games in high leverage situations. I try not to be so harsh figuring game planning against him. You're right, Dirty Dancer. I think that's a fantastic point. But I think you can weigh that in some ways where we have seen other guys at other positions even where they are the game plan, but they are still able to do so many certain things in that game to show, okay, yes, there you can still feel safe projecting them, such as a Nick Clifford, right? And Norin, yes, Dirty Dancer says Norin is always here with me as always. Yes, absolutely. Let's talk about JT's teammate, Darren Williams, though. 23 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals and an assist. Was 9 of 18 from the floor, 3 of 8 from deep. I get so confused with Darren Williams because he gives me some Jalen Slauson vibes. And if anybody who's a Draft Sicko fan I'm speaking of the Draft Sicko show here on No Ceilings, you guys have heard Maxwell and I talk about Jalen Slauson and the impact that he has to a game, but he's so back-to-the-back oriented, and that's what we saw from Darren Williams today. And it worked more times than not, but in crunch time, Houck bothered a few of those post looks. He did have 4 fouls, so you kind of wonder how much could he really sell out on the defensive end, especially in these moments where Walter Clayton Jr. is being defended by Darren Williams, who has a size advantage, and he's no slouch athletically, but how much could you really close out on a Walter Clayton Jr. who's hitting these ridiculous shots close to the game, or he's manipulating and leveraging that 3-point gravity that he has to attack the basket and put pressure on the defense to get to the free throw line. It's hard when your best player to go out and stop a guy like Walter Clayton Jr. is in foul trouble, and he's also been your most consistent relied upon guy. I don't know how you project a Darren Williams right now to cleanly fit in an NBA team because he is so back to the basket reliant. He is a good defender, but how do you want to value that type of a player? I'm still working that out myself, to be fully honest and transparent. Texas Tech, though, beyond those two, you want to talk about the rest of their starting five. Anderson, Hawkins, and Walton combined for 13 points on 4 of 13 shooting from the floor, 3 of 10 from deep. McMillan off the bench was the only other consistent offensive presence, bringing in 14 points. You can't do that against Florida. But when you have guys like Walter Clayton Jr., who is not an all defensive type player, but we saw in this game that he does enough to not be bullied. But you also have Will Richard and Elijah Martin, who are both really pretty solid athletes and defenders. They really bothered Tech. And then the size in the middle, and the not only the size in the middle, but the consistent size in the middle, where you're making substitutions, but you're not really taking a step back if you're Florida. This is why Metcalf and I were in on Florida on this game, and they kind of proved us right. So let's transition now to the other Saturday game, the main event, if you will. Alabama versus Duke. I was fooled. I thought this game was going to be much more close than it was, in all honesty. I'm a big Coach Oates fan. There's some news about him going on right now that, excuse me, as my dog is going crazy. There's some big news on him right now that he may or may not be the coach at Alabama. I would hate to see that if I'm a Bama fan, especially with a guy like Taylor Ball-Bone, who I'm really high on, coming back to the program to go in. But you're seeing a Moussa Diabate transfer out. I don't know what's going on. I think Aiden Sherrill has come out and said that he is returning. Bama's in flux. Back to this game. I thought Alabama's system and length was going to allow this game to be closer, especially if you would have told me that Cooper Flagg is, quote, only going to score 16 points and not be his most efficient self. Did I misspeak and not say Houston Duke? I meant to say Alabama Duke if I did. I'm kind of thinking ahead of myself, but we're talking about this past Saturday's game, Dirty Dancer. All good. Alabama shot 9 more shots than Duke in this game. Shot 19 more threes. They turned the ball over less than Duke by 2 more fast break points, and that was really all the Tide had in their favor. If you look in this matchup, Duke was almost 20% better from the floor, 21% better from deep. They were plus 11 on the glass, plus 5 in assists, plus 12 in points in the paint. And this was the Con Knipple game. And folks, I am becoming a fan. I have probably been one of the least supportive in the No Ceilings group for Con Knipple. I'll go ahead and spoil this now. I have him 9th on my current big board. And there's just been something about him. I don't know if it's the Duke face that he has. I don't know if it's how much is Cooper Flagg inflating him. But if you go back and look at Cooper whenever he was not playing and Con still being that consistent, reliable guy, I don't know. I haven't come around on him up until recently. But in this game against Alabama, he scored 21 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals. He was 6 of 15 from the floor, 2 of 4 from deep, 7 of 7 from the free throw line. And he drew the LeBaron Philon assignment a lot during this game. And we're going to talk about LeBaron here soon. Another guy that kind of perplexes me. What really stood out to me about what Con was able to do against a guy like LeBaron, who some people view way higher than what I do, and I could be wrong. I could be playing catch up with where people are on LeBaron. I have some questions though. But there's no doubt that LeBaron is a strong defensive player. That's where I will give LeBaron like all the credit in the world. Con was able to do this drive and pivot game throughout most of the night. And that's what really kind of sold me on Con's projection, to where it's not just perimeter oriented. It's not just relocate, catch and shoot and let it fly, which he is good at. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, NBA teams need that type of a player. But his drive and attack, his aggressiveness, the pace of play that he goes with, he's not skittish. He doesn't shy away from contact. he is kind of built in like this guard version of Luke Arangody from Notre Dame. Shout out to anybody who knows who I'm talking about there. But I do worry a little bit about his athleticism and how that translates. But if you look at everything that Khan does away from the ball, it's super clean. The shot comes off his hands so daggum fast. It's almost impossible to block. Playmaking was crisp, keeping plays alive because he continues to dribble. And this is supposed to be an off-guard player. Corey of No Ceilings often talks about how Duke really doesn't have a point guard. Cooper Flagg has been the point guard throughout a lot of the year. Khan is really kind of stepping up his on-the-ball play, and it's really helped make me become more of a fan. I love the pace that he plays with. Not only is he a reliable scorer, he's a good teammate too. There was this baseline out of bounds play towards the back end of the second half to where he sets two different screens and then kind of in the fashion what Houston did with Milos Uzan last week, what we recapped last week, where Khan sets these two screens, cuts baseline, and he's open for a layup. And I think that there's just so much you can do with a guy like Khan. He's risen up my board. I have him at 9, and I haven't been the biggest Khan guy in the world. Now, another guy who on big boards is rising up, and maybe we shouldn't be surprised. Maybe we should be a little bit more relaxed when these players that we deem to be the next big thing take a season or two to really rise up into that level of production. Maybe we should be a little bit more patient with a guy like Tyrese Proctor, who stepped in with 17 points, a pretty modest performance from what he's been doing as of late. He's still finding ways to contribute. And what I really loved is on top of the 17 points, he had 5 boards, 2 assists, 2 steals. He had some really nice help and deny plays on defense to where he would shoot a passing lane. He was active with his hands. He stuck to his man even away from the ball. He didn't look disinterested or disengaged. And I think having a team that does so much like team dynamic type scoring, despite the level of prospects that they're bringing in, either from high school or the transfer portal in a Sion James or a Malik Brown, there is so much buy-in to what the team is wanting to do. And I think that has helped Tyrese so much this season to where he didn't just live on the perimeter. There's been games this year where he scores 25 because he's 7 of 9 from 3 or whatever. He was only 5 shots from deep, but was 7 of 10 from the floor overall. And another player I want to touch on, and real quick, I'm going to touch on the chat. Khan is good. I fought against it so long. Dirty Dancer, I'm right there with you. Reminds me of Desmond Bain with not great tools, but just a gamer. That's a fair comp. I really like that. Norm Rad said I'm only about halfway there. D. Joda said guys can get played off the court if they can't physically hang. Stronger, bigger guys. I think Khan's strength gives him a floor, even if he's slower than you like. That's fair. Norin says I agree. Don't like him top 10 though. Norin, I'm very late to the party with No Ceilings. I'm back half of that top 10. Maybe he falls, but right now, I don't know. I kind of like him in that range. Mini Herringody doesn't feel great. Mini Eagle is still a good player. I'll buy that for $1. And I'm personally biased towards players who show that they can learn, improve, and adapt. This is why I'm originally so low on Khan, but he's recently come around. Djota perfectly encapsulates my feel for where he's at right now. But Proctor, I have him as a mid-second round guy. And this is a guy who I haven't really given much draft consideration to. Not that I haven't watched him, not that I haven't been analyzing. I just really want to make sure with deep teams like Duke, with deep teams like Florida, how much is your production being inflated by others? Proctor has shown enough, in my opinion, to be kind of that middle second round prospect to, especially with players who might test to come back. Proctor has a real case of shooting up boards late. And again, this was a guy who a couple cycles ago was being projected lottery, and he hasn't really shown that playmaking feel because of the types of players that Duke has brought in recently. Maybe an NBA team looks at what he's doing now, buying into the role that he has and saying, once upon a time, this guy was supposed to be a real good facilitator. Maybe if we ask him, maybe if we put him in these roles, he can dive in on that too. I don't know, but Proctor is definitely worth considering more as a draftable guy. I'm coming around on that. Let's talk about Kaman Malawach, who I'll pull you behind the curtain again because there's no one here to stop me. I have the microphone, so I can say whatever I want. Malawach is a pretty divisive guy, as you could imagine, even within no ceilings. And some people that I talk to, I won't spell names. Some people that I talk to are kind of lower on him. And I have been of that mindset too, where early in the year, I felt like I was more forgiving because I do like these late to the game prospects where they're just figuring things out. And Malawach is only 4 to 5 years, depending on where you want to start the year calendar of learning basketball. Give him a lot of credit for being the top big man prospect coming into this class. There's a lot that you can congratulate and thank him for, right? And in this game, he had 14 points, 9 rebounds, which has not always been what you want to see from a player as big as him, but stepped up and had 9 rebounds, had 2 blocks. Again, not something that you always see with Malawach, but you saw it today, or excuse me, last week. You know what I mean? 1 assist and 1 steal. And it was a very Malawach performance to where you saw him do some very Malawach things. And again, Norm Rad in the chat. Again, thank you everybody for watching. I got Malawach 7. I have him 12. So I obviously don't hate his guts. I just have concerns. And why I say that this was a very Malawach game to me. He had some plays where he was able to stay in front of LeBaron Philon and some other perimeter players. And you're like, man, that's great, right? But he also had this play. I'm going to fast forward on the notes. So if I'm stammering, you're just going to have to kind of deal with it, right? There was a play with a minute left in the first half where he was switched from Sears to Grant Nelson. And you look at this play and you're like, my goodness, okay, this is why so many people are high on him because of the switchability, right? You look at that play, fast forward, the ball gets handed off to Youngblood. Youngblood drives to the basket. Now, Malawach is kind of weak side, playing in between his man, Grant Nelson, who's posted up in the opposite corner from the angle that Chris Youngblood is driving to. He's halfway playing the Youngblood drive and halfway getting ready, I'm assuming, for a kick out to Grant Nelson, who we all know is kind of perimeter tilted. Youngblood continues to drive to the basket, and Malawach is just kind of there in between the drive and in between the kick out. He doesn't do either. He doesn't close out to challenge Youngblood's shot, nor does he really pay attention to Nelson, who isn't just posted up in the corner at this point. As Youngblood is diving to the rim, Grant Nelson cuts to the basket. Malawach doesn't see his man, who he's kind of halfway in between, cut to the rim, doesn't follow him, nor does he engage Youngblood on the drive. And I look at that play as like, NBA teams are going to be able to do so much more creative things if this is going to be your anchor. I have so many questions on to how much Cooper Flagg is inflating a guy like Kaman Malawach as opposed to a Conkanipple. But there were so many things that he did well in this game too. If you talk about the closeouts, you talk about keeping his feet active and guarding on the perimeter. You talk about the ability to play through the flow of the offense and finish in the paint. Now, does he play kind of low to the ground in the paint more so than I would like to see? Sometimes, but because he's so big, he's able to convert over some of these smaller Alabama players. I'm still very torn on Malawach, but at the end of the day, if you're Duke, you beat Alabama in the manner that you do, and he gets you almost a double-double with 2 blocks and an assist and a steal. You can't be overly critical of a college matchup. If I'm breaking down and analyzing the film as to how I feel about him translating into the NBA, I have a little bit more concerns. And now I talked about Cooper Flagg. I've kind of buried the lead a little bit. Everybody wants to know what we think about the number 1 player in this class. Now, this wasn't the best Cooper Flagg performance. He had 16 points with 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and a block. Wasn't the most efficient game, but I think it's awesome to where Cooper Flagg might be the best player in this class while also being the best teammate in all of college basketball, because he didn't force himself onto this game. He kind of took what was there, still played hard and defended well, held Grant Nelson to just 10 points and forced him into some foul trouble where Grant Nelson ended the game with 4 fouls. had some nice passes within the flow of the offense. Some of those were kickouts to a guy like Con Knipple or Tyrese Proctor. Some of them were finding a rolling came in mile watch to the basket. He was just kind of in the flow of the game, didn't really look to take over, still finished with a great statistical game. Nothing more to really talk about, and that's kind of crazy whenever you're considering the number one player in this pick or in this draft, because he still looked like the number one player in this draft, even though it was an off game and he didn't really force himself into there. Maybe you want to see some takeover. Maybe you want to see some more nasty. I was a big fan of the fact that Cooper just kind of let Con Knipple be the hero of this game and push Duke past Alabama in the manner that they do. Let's switch over to talking about some prospects for Alabama now. LeBaron Philon, a guy who I've been kind of critical of, I'll say, because he is not like a huge guard in both in terms of height and or weight, but he was the Alabama's best and most consistent presence for the Tide in this game. He had 16 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals, 4 of 9 from the floor, 3 of 6 from deep, 5 of 6 from the line. He kind of continued this every third game he can shoot thing, which is enough to where the people who want to believe in the projection of LeBaron Philon could point to him and say, I think that he might be able to shoot. But those other 2 games, those who have been a little bit more skeptical like myself can point to and say, man, I don't know. Like, he's really smart. He processes well. I love his defense, but can he shoot it? And is he physical enough? Against Duke, he was. He had 16 points, 5 boards, 3 assists, 3 steals, was 4-9 from the floor, 3 of 6 from deep, 5 of 6 from the line. I think it's clear that he's a very smart player. And again, I think it's on defense in particular where you get into that. And D. Joda in the chat says, have you talked about Sears? I'm going to probably close on him. I really want to talk about LeBaron first, because a guy who I've been skeptical of, I want to also recognize when he has games to where maybe I need to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit. Maybe I do need to be a little less critical in some areas and give him more credit in the areas that he's good at. The 3 steals that he had in this game may have undersold his overall defensive impact, because he was very active defensively. He tipped passes in passing lanes. He kind of forced the dribble to be picked up and swung the ball away. All of those things were good. And yet Con was still able to bully him in certain regards. And I know that Con is one of the better basketball players in college basketball, but for these NBA-based projections, you kind of have to think beyond that and say, if Con Knipple, who is maybe like somewhere between 6'5" to 6'7", we still got to wait for the combine to come out. If Con Knipple can bully this defensively tilted guard in the manner that he did, how is that going to fare in the NBA? And this is where I have to kind of sit down and really hone in my projections, go back and see how some of these other guards did. And I'll go to Norrin Rad in the chat, who said LeBaron is similar to Rondo for you. And I do see that as well, because he is a very sharp passer, very sharp defender, active in a lot of ways. You just really want him to shoot the ball. And not only is he going to be efficient, but is he going to have the volume to where you even have to respect the efficiency? That's another question that's that next layer to your evaluation that you really have to ask. I think the handle is solid, but he didn't really force himself into the paint. There was a few times where Proctor, who in my opinion, if you look at Duke and you're analyzing who I want to try to attack off the bounce, Proctor's probably going to be that guy. And I do recognize that Proctor's got good length for his position. He's got good size for his position. I recognize all of those things. But Proctor has to be the guy that you want to pick on. And there was just too many times where I saw LeBaron, again, who had a fantastic game, just going to that next level deeper. I wanted to see him be a little bit more aggressive, taking him off the bounce when he wanted to attack Con, who had the strength advantage and maybe even a little bit of length advantage. I don't know. But overall, I still have him in like this late first to early second range. There are a few guards who, just to be truthful, I'm a little bit more high on because they have more offensive gifts, I would say, than LeBaron. This was another tough game for Sears, and I know that Mark Sears, someone asked in the chat, I think it was D. Jota, asked, what about Mark Sears? Another tough game. And for as many times as we want to point to in the draft community, I'm guilty of this myself. For these guys who make noise and return and end up hurting their draft stock, we need to remember players like Mark Sears and to an extent Hunter Salas as well, who last year we had heated war room discussions on a guy like Mark Sears to how high we want to take him. And last year there was the Jalen Brunson comparisons were really strong, both physically similar, staturally they're very similar. And I would even say statistically last season, you could draw some parallels. This year, not so much. And it's just been hard because you want a guy like Mark Sears, who I was a real big fan of when he was playing with Baylor Shireman at Ohio. So if you want to take a few seasons back look approach, like I really liked Mark Sears and I thought him going to Alabama was going to be great for him. And it was last year. This year, biggest game of the season for Alabama. 6 points on 2 of 12 shooting from the floor, 1 of 5 from deep, 1 of 5 from the free throw line. Yes, he had 6 assists. He also had 5 turnovers with no rebounds and 0 disruptive defensive plays. Grant Nelson, and Mark Sears have been kind of the tentpole players for Bama this season, and they've sort of survived their inconsistencies up until this point. And you could only play with fire so long before you get burned in college basketball. And I don't really want to dig into the reasons why Mark Sears probably is not a guy, nor Grant Nelson, who I want to devote a significant amount of draft capital, if any. I just think that the film and the stats are significant enough reasons as to why. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll transition to these Sunday recaps. Sunday recap is going to be less conversation than these games. These games had the most amount of draft prospects, in my opinion, the most amount of kind of fun things to talk about, if you will. These Sunday games were fun. They're just not going to be as long as discussion. So hang tight. We'll be right back. All right. So we're back here recapping Sunday. Tennessee and Houston, a game that Metcalf and I said, stay away from this game. It was too close. I think the line was 2.5 between both of these, between these two teams, and it ended up not being very close at all. And I think in your heart of hearts, if you had it in the mud game between these two teams who both live in the mud, you kind of had to go with the team who personifies that type of mantra, and that's Houston. Tennessee did shoot 16 more free throws in Houston. They fouled significantly fewer times in Houston, 9 to their 16. That's about it. Houston took 14 more shots and was about 14% better from the floor. They shot around 19% better from deep, made 4 more threes on fewer attempts. They were +7 on the glass, +3 in assists, +4 in steals, +2 in blocks, and +16 points in the paint. Again, a very in the mud game, which is where Houston thrives. If you want to know what I mean when I say these in the mud games, look at the 2 best performers for Houston. LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp combined for 33 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists. This was on a combined 12 of 31 shooting performance from the floor, only 6 of 18 from deep, and 3 of 3 from the line. Now, for those who listened to our last preview show where we broke down this game, there were a couple players that I'm going to pat myself on the back here. I'm going to try not to break my arm. There were 2 players that I said, if you look at the box score when this game is over, you don't look at the score, you just look at individual stats. There were 2 players that I touched on, JoJo Tugler and Igor Milicic Jr. Norn Rat said, I want to know who you got in these games. It's coming up, Norn. We're going to recap Sunday, and then we're going to dive into today. I said that if JoJo Tugler had 6 or more points, then Houston won. How many points did JoJo Tugler had? He had 6. And I said if Igor Milicic scored 8 points or more, then Tennessee won this game. Igor Milicic had 2 points. We'll talk about that in a minute. Uzan, who has received a lot of draft buzz as of late, only scored 6 points on 3 of 9 shooting from the floor, 0-2 from deep. There's a lot of people advocating that Milos Uzan should be a top 45 pick. I don't belong in that camp. I haven't really. I will give credit to him, though. I am considering drafting him more towards the last 15 of the second round, somewhere in that neighborhood. But right now, I'm just concerned because the shooting hasn't always been consistent. This was the biggest season for him offensively to his college career so far. And the three-point shot is very line drivey, and it betrayed him in this game. Milicic for Tennessee was only took 2 shots from the floor, which is not going to be enough, especially when Tennessee relies on their 3 guards. Their 3 guards versus Houston three guards is where I thought the game was going to come down to. I said Houston has 3 guards that they start, being Cryer, Uzan, and Emmanuel Sharp. They all start the game. Tennessee has 3 guards. One of those, being Jordan Gainey, comes in off the bench. I kind of gave Houston the nod because I thought that Tennessee, the way that they stagger their guards, was going to bite them in the butt a little bit. Zakai Ziegler was 1 of 9 from the floor. He was only 1 of 6 from deep, 5 assists, 4 turnovers. He only scored what was it, like 5 points, something like that, and was Tennessee's 3rd leading scorer. That's really what hurt Tennessee, is that they couldn't get any consistent offensive performance because Houston's defense is so good. They are so suffocating, and they can switch everything with their front court that you really have to be on your P's and Q's when you're on offense. And Tennessee just has never really been a trustworthy offensive team whenever it really comes down to it. Ziegler had a really bad game. Now, Chaz Lanier, who is another guard for Tennessee, who people really like as a maybe 2nd round prospect. And I love Swaggy Chaz. I liked him at North Florida before he transferred over, interviewed him. I'm kind of stepping back away from him. He had 17 points, but was only 2 of 12 from deep, which is really his shot diet. You know, Chaz is going to live and die by the 3, and he was only 2 of 12 from deep. 4 of 18 overall, only 1 assist, which again is kind of his game. He is not going to be a ball distributor. He did grab 7 rebounds, though. Gainey coming in off the bench was really the only reliable offensive threat for Tennessee. And again, that's coming off the bench. This is why I thought Houston had the advantage, because their best players are on the floor all the time. Gainey was 6 of 12 from the floor, 2 of 5 from deep, 3 of 3 from the line, had 3 boards, 2 assists, and 1 steal. This is why I was very high. Shouldn't say very high. This is why I thought Houston had the edge, and this is ultimately why they ended up advancing. Let's transition now to the last Sunday game, Michigan State versus Auburn, where Auburn won 70-64. Michigan was 2% better from deep. Both teams made 7 3-pointers. Michigan State had 2 more made free throws than Auburn. They shot 26% better from the line, out-rebounded Auburn by 2, had 1 more steal, and had the advantage in fast break. Now, you hear that and you're thinking, how in the heck does Auburn win this game? Well, Auburn made 4 more shots on 3 fewer attempts. They had 4 more assists. They were +5 in points off of turnovers while turning the ball over 3 fewer times. They were +4 in points of the paint, and they fouled less. They led by as much as 15 at one point, and in college basketball, that can often be enough to really hang on and win. This was a huge Janai Broome game, and for as many people as there are, whether they're at No Ceilings, whether they're in the chat, whether they are other outlets, Janai Broome has fans and he has skeptics. And I totally understand why, because he's kind of a center that plays the 4 for Auburn. He's not huge. He doesn't really have like the smoothest offensive game, though it is efficient. And he is a shot blocker, but not really a rim deterrent. It's kind of, it could be a jumbled projection. But this was a huge game for him where he scored 25 points, 14 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 block, and 1 steal. He was 10 of 13 from the floor, 2 of 2 from deep, 3 of 5 from the line. And he actually dealt with an injury in this game, If you go back and look at the game log, you could do this, but in the second half, he was out with an injury, came back for about a minute or so, sat for a while, came back in, and he did all of that in 29 points. There was actually some concern as to his availability today. Eric Olson in the chat says they're sleeping on him, referencing Janai Broome. Eric, kind of with you, bud. He completely overpowered Kohler, who had 4 fouls, and he was their best off there, being Michigan State. Kohler was Michigan State's best offensive player, played with 4 fouls because of Janai Broome. And Janai did a little bit from everywhere, where he has some back to the basket stuff. He was facing up. He was taking people off the bounce. He did some screen and rolling, some cutting. He got his points from a lot of different areas. And this strong game is still giving me reason enough to kind of have him in like the latter portion of the 20s, like that mid to late 20s range. He's just doing enough to be relied upon, hitting threes, scoring in the paint, blocking shots, passing the ball, rebounding. I do think that his ball handling is going to portray him a little bit in the NBA, where he does get away from like these 2.5 step shuffle plays that he gets into. D. Joda said Janai was unbelievable last week. Literally went away, got painkillers, came back, and immediately scored. Yeah, Joda, he was phenomenal. And again, there was questions as to whether or not he was going to play. He's still going to play today, which I'm very excited about. I'm just happy that he is continuing his stellar performance throughout this season. I think he's a first-round talent. He's kind of got to be. Now, if you look beyond Janai Broome, Auburn really struggled. Tahad was really, I guess, if you would try to figure out if Janai Broome was the Batman in this game, who the Robin would be, I guess you could look at Tahad, who scored 10 points off of the bench, but wasn't super efficient. He was 4 of 12 from the floor, 2 of 6 from 3. The shots that he did hit were very timely, and they allowed the game to kind of continue to go in Auburn's favor, especially the 3-point shots. He had a nice drive or two into the basket. He did get blocked by Jace Richardson, who we'll talk about here in a second. Moved the ball around decently. Outside of him, Auburn really kind of had to scrape and claw from everybody else on the floor to contribute at random points. There was no consistent scoring presence nor defensive presence outside of Broome throughout the game. And again, he was out. He only played 29 points. I feel like this game is a runaway if he stays healthy and doesn't have to deal with the injury that he had. Michigan State, we'll touch on them real quick. They leaned on Kohler, who had 17 points, grabbed 11 rebounds, and had 2 assists. He had a nice overall game, but had very little help. Jace Richardson, we touched on him. He had that nice block against Tahad driving to the basket. He only had 11 points, was 4 of 13 from the floor, 0 of 2 from deep, and had 3 points come from the line. So if you look at the points that he actually scored within the play of a game, 8 points on 4 of 13 shooting is not what you want to see from a guy who, I'll admit, I'm becoming more interested in, but I still can't buy into the top 10 range that a lot of people have him in. He has nice feel. He has good length and pace of play. Overall, I am a little bit concerned with how he's going to get baskets in the league. I worry about his passing. He did have 3 assists in this game, which is kind of like an above average passing game coming from a smaller guard. So you worry a little bit about that. I worry about where his points are going to come from. I think he's ultimately going to be a reliable 3-point shooter. Outside of that, what's he giving you defensively at the next level? What's he giving you moving the ball at the next level? I don't know. I have concerns. Overall, though, Auburn put together they put together the type of team that you can make mistakes and kind of skate by because you have the strength advantage. You have the length advantage with guys like Dylan Cardwell playing alongside a guy like Janai Broome and allow Broome to roam around while Cardwell can match up against some of these more domineering fives that at this point in the season you're kind of running out of. Now Cardwell gets to kind of throw his body weight around, set really good screens and rebound. So it ultimately ended up being the type of game that I thought we could have seen, and it ended up breaking that way. So we're going to take another break, and then we'll close out today by previewing the 2 games that we have. Hang tight just a second. All right, so let's talk about today's games. Starting at 6:09 p.m. Eastern on CBS, Florida versus Auburn. Florida is minus 2.5 for this game. And again, Janai Broome is supposedly a go for this matchup, which you're going to need. These two teams faced off before. An electric performance, an upset take place in this game again. I don't know. Florida, I think, has the dogs on the defensive side of the ball to really make it almost impossible for Auburn to get by without contributions from outside of Janai Broome, if that makes sense. Let me rewind that and say it again. Florida has the depth to where Auburn has to be stellar from everybody outside of Janai Broome in order to walk away victorious. I think with Hawk, with Condon, with Handglotton, there's just so many big guys from Florida to where Broome and Cardwell have to be lights out, both of them together. Cardwell has to be on his P's and Q's. I'm curious to see how Coach Golden from Florida maybe look to pull the big men away from the inside. Maybe they kind of go for a 5-out approach, especially with how Condon has shown the ability to shoot. Hawk right now is lights out from 3. You still have Will Richard. You still have Elijah Martin. You still have Walter Clayton, to where you can play this 5-out type system, draw the bigs out for Auburn, and punish them. That's where I think the advantage lies. And if you look at the guard play, Auburn has some senior guards. You got Denver Jones. You got Chad Baker-Mazara, who might be, as my dog is going crazy, who might have the advantage over Will Richard height-wise, but Will Richard is playing lights-out defense. I think that this game could ultimately end up coming down to a few big plays by Walter Clayton Jr. Is Tahad Pettiford maybe the X factor for Auburn? It's hard. I'm going to go Florida by 6, though. I just think that this team is too deep. I've liked them from the start of this tournament. Auburn has had a heck of a season. This is no slight against them. I think Florida just got the dogs. Now, let's go to the last game that we're going to be previewing. Houston versus Duke. Duke is minus 4.5. This game is at 8:49 p.m. Eastern on CBS, so you only got to watch one channel to watch basketball today, folks. I have said throughout most of the tournament that outside of Houston, that the bigger teams are winning right now. And Houston, their bracket broke right for them for their style of play to really kind of go as far as they have, especially drawing Tennessee, who plays a Houston-like game but just doesn't have the Houston-like dogs. I think this is where Houston luck runs out because Duke is tall across the board. They are skilled across the board. They can shoot. I think that their guards can really put a hurt on Houston. I do feel like Emmanuel Sharp versus Con Knipple is going to be fun to watch as like a one-on-one matchup. I'm curious to see how Malawatch fares against a Roberts or a JoJo Tugler at certain points in this game. And who draws the Cooper Flag assignment at that point? If Flag is going to be defended by Houston's perimeter players, then it's going to be Duke in a walkaway. But also, if Tugler is out there guarding Flag, Tugler will get in foul trouble pretty quickly if that happens. I think that that's easy. I have Duke by 12, even though that this was a minus 4.5 game for Duke. I think Duke wins this by 12. I'm not trying to discredit Houston, nor am I trying to say that Houston has not been a good team. I give them all the credit in the world for making it as far as they have. They do have upperclassmen on this team, but if LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp put up the performance against Duke that they did against Tennessee, and if Milos Uzan does it too, that's going to be a tough matchup for Houston. I just think Duke is too talented and too tall for Houston to win. Maybe they take a chunk out of Duke and they kind of limp out. I'm still in favor of Duke. But that's going to do it for today, folks. Appreciate everyone taking the time to, recap last week, preview this week, talk about the draft, because that's just what we do here at No Ceilings. As I mentioned, we have a fully loaded week coming up on the website, NoCeilingsNBA.com. This might be a record for the longest amount of time that anyone referenced NoCeilingsNBA.com this late in the show without doing anything before. So check that out. We got big boards coming out this week. It's going to be a great time, and stay tuned because we're going to be bringing you some exclusives. We just had the McDonald's All-American recap where we did have butts in the seat there for our brand. We're going to have the Portsmouth Invitational. We're going to have Hoop Summit. We're going to be bringing you some very exclusive stuff that you're only going to be able to find at No Ceilings. So go over to NoCeilingsNBA.com, follow our work there. If you're here on the YouTube channel, I'm seeing a lot of people here. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you're here, hit a like button. I know that you hear that every time you watch a show. I'm gonna beg you, please hit a like button while you're here, because you would be surprised how much it does for the show and this platform. So if you're here, hit that like button, share this with your friends. Everybody's starting to tune into the draft. Everyone's about to be a draft expert at work. I know this. Okay, so if you want to be a draft expert at work, follow what we're doing here at No Ceilings. We're plugged in. We're analyzing everything. We're analyzing all these prospects, from the biggest of names to the deepest of sleepers, to quote what we do at Draft Sickos. Be locked in for everything that we're doing, because we are locked in and we're about to hit our stride. But that's going to do it for today. I hope everyone enjoys their weekend of hoops. Continue to, love each other out there. Be kind to one another. It's not hard to be a good human. We'll talk to y'all soon. Much love, y'all.